Happy Friday, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. And some really good news. We're already off to a better start today than yesterday, because if you remember, for those of you who watched the video at the very beginning of the program, we were on camera yesterday for, 10, 15 seconds before I even realized that we were live. So at least today, I'm ready to go on the whistle for the start of the show. And we are busy. Jeff Santel, recruiting stuff, some pretty important stuff for him beyond obviously transfer quarterback news. We'll talk about all of that on today's show, but there is still some stuff to be done for Georgia with its 2020 class and some potential competitors for a couple of those big names still out there for the Dogs. So we'll do all of that with Jeff Santel in today's show. As you might imagine, a lot from transfer quarterbacks from me off the top of the program. I'm going to push back a little bit against the, growing, is it dissension? Is that right? The right word? Against Georgia and the fact that it's going to fall apart in 2020. I'll do my part to push back on that a little bit. And you better believe we'll take the doofus Tom Morris to task for some of the things that he's been doing as it relates to Cade Mays. We'll cover all of those bases throughout our program. Really glad to have you with us. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I've got a lot of faults. Many of you could be very good at listing all those out. I think one of the things, though, that I'm probably pretty good at is I'm just kind of self-aware. I sort of know who I am. I sort of know what I'm a part of. And one of the things I have very much clarity about, one of the things I have total awareness of is that there is this, industrial, media industrial complex built around Georgia football that I'm kind of a part of. I do sort of get, what a crazy machine this must look like to people on the outside, whether they're entering into the fray of Georgia football or kind of living in that bubble. We always kind of talk about the bubble of DawgNation. I can only imagine how weird all of this must seem. And one of the byproducts of that, and as I said before, I'm very much a part of this, very guilty of contributing to this, is almost anybody on the most flimsy evidence whatsoever can be hyped up to the top of the mountain in 2 seconds, because when there's so much coverage, when a show like this reaches as many people as it does, and we do it every single day, big microphone, big cameras, big everything else, every conversation just has a way of kind of feeling really, really big. And on very little evidence, sometimes we can turn for instance, potential graduate transfer quarterback into the next Eric Zai or the next Aaron Murray or next, kind of all-time great Georgia quarterback, whichever one you kind of want to think of. So I do realize that's kind of like the awning that hangs over all of this, which is when we start talking about potential names as a replacement for Georgia at the quarterback position, there's just a way of kind of hyping up these guys to the heavens on the basis of some fairly meager results, so totally understand that going in. However, when you think about at least one of the names that could be out there for Georgia, and it's probably important to note that there could still be multiples of names that Georgia's considering, but one that does seem to be out there is a we'll call him former Wake Forest quarterback Jamie Newman, because he's at least transferring somewhere, and a lot of Georgia fans do hope that's to UGA, and based on some stuff you may have seen at DawgNation.com, some reporting that says this could be happening in terms of his college choice one way or another sooner rather than later. So you keep your ear to the ground on that, eyes on where all this goes next. And I told you yesterday on the show that admittedly I see a lot to like in Jamie Newman. Now, I'm going to try to be very careful and not use this to kind of fan the flames of hysteria and tell you that Newman's going to come to Georgia and win the Heisman Trophy, if he does indeed come, that he's going to come here and be the greatest thing that Georgia's ever seen and lead Georgia to incredible heights. He might do really well, but I'm going to be careful not to get the hype train too far out from the station when it comes to the potential that Newman could be a part of Georgia and what would still be a competition with other quarterbacks like Carson Beck, who Jeff Santel has written about this week, Dwan Mathis, who Mike Griffith has written about this week, Stetson Bennett, who kind of remains a little bit of a fan favorite because of the way in which he was talked about by Georgia players going back to his scout team work back in 2017. But when it comes to Newman, I do think there's some really interesting evidence there that even though that the overall statistical profile for him playing at Wake Forest was kind of about what you'd expect from a Wake Forest quarterback, some good, some bad, and whatever else, more good maybe at the beginning of the season, a little bit worse as the season progressed. Yet even within all of this, there is still this undeniable thread of commentary around him that, hold on, this is actually a pretty interesting prospect. And maybe, just maybe, this was a guy who was kind of playing in an outpost like Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and you take this particular prospect, all the raw materials and resources that Newman has at his disposal, you put him around a Georgia offense, if indeed he comes to UGA, and suddenly you're talking about a pretty interesting connection and combination all the way around. One of the things that leads me to want to say that is something that a guy named Chris Trapasso wrote for CBS Sports going back to November. Now, Trapasso's not a writer that I'm all that familiar with, but apparently he's a draft guy. And he was actually writing about Newman from the basis of if he were to declare for the NFL draft, because he would have been draft eligible this year. But when you see the overall description of what Trapasso says about Newman, you're left with could this guy be coming to Georgia? And if he does, what does that look like on a Georgia practice field? What would that look like on G-Day? And could this be the guy that eventually wins a UGA quarterback competition? Let me read you a couple sentences here. And if you're skeptical about Newman, I totally understand why. But if this doesn't get you at least a little bit more intrigued by what he might bring to the table, then I don't know what to tell you. Trapasso writing for CBS Sports about Newman, that he's 6'4", 230-pound draft-eligible quarterback of a 7-1 team in the Power 5 conference. Obviously, Wake Forest did not finish 7-1. He goes on to say, but for some reason, he's garnering essentially no draft buzz. Until now, Wake Forest Jamie Newman has plus athleticism, which means he's more athletic than the average guy, decently strong arm, has made an assortment of some of the most high-level plays from inside the pocket of any quarterback in college football this season. Trapasso at CBS Sports goes on to say, actually, probably only Joe Burrow from LSU and maybe Oregon's Justin Herbert have made more retweet-worthy, highlight reel throws from between the tackles this year. Trapasso, at least in terms of the quote I'm going to share with you, finishes by saying, as a redshirt junior, Newman does have another year of eligibility. But what he's done as a passer and a runner this season has put him inside my top 50 right now. So a top 50 prospect overall, according to a CBS Sports guy. Now, he's not going to the NFL draft. He's going to go somewhere else for his final year of college, and maybe ends up being Georgia. And for me, that is a pretty interesting description of what a guy like Newman might bring to the table, and one of the reasons why I would get at least a little bit more excited about the idea that he could be inserted into a competition at Georgia to go along with some of the other names that I mentioned. We also had a member of our team, Michael Carvel, got a chance to catch up with Quincy Avery. Avery's a quarterback's coach who has worked with Newman and along with a number of other really big-name quarterbacks over the years. He also kind of provided his description of what Newman brings to the table. Here's what quarterbacks coach Quincy Avery said about Jamie Newman.
He's 6'3", he's 225. He's an amazing athlete. So he can do so much in the run game and add to the run game and make it really difficult for people to, stack the box and play defense against him. And then, make it really difficult for people to play coverage and have an open box. And then he also has the ability to make every single throw on the football field. You look at his stats, and he was leading the country in contested throws. He didn't have the receivers to the level of a school like Georgia, but he was able to throw balls in tight spaces and complete them at a high clip. And then, of course, what he did in the run game was incredible.
So listen, obviously the thing that's going to get most people's attention about Newman right away is the fact that he is a pretty good runner. I believe he had more than 500 yards rushing for Wake Forest this season. That's going to be the thing that gets the most attention because that's the thing that Georgia really hasn't had a lot of. I'm talking about going back years and years and years. However, the thing that Avery says there that probably gets my attention the most, admittedly, though, I do like the idea of the athleticism that Newman potentially brings to the table. But the thing that he says that gets my attention is that willingness to throw the ball into tight windows. That's a thing. That's a thing you've got to be able to do, especially given the press coverage that you're going to face in the SEC, if that's indeed where Newman lands, that willingness to kind of put the ball at risk and that willingness to kind of make a risky throw, which, no risk it, no biscuit, whatever, corny phrase you want to use there. The willingness to do that, I think, goes a long way, too. So the overall bottom line for me is, I realize it can be very easy to kind of hype up a Wake Forest quarterback and make him sound like an all-time great before he even makes his college decision. And at this point in time, who knows if he even chooses UGA, although there's certainly some chatter that he might. I do get all of that, and I think it's also important to note that there is potentially something here below the surface of a quarterback who was a part of a Demon Deacons offense that by the end of the season was kind of not really on the front page of a lot of college football websites or TV shows or anything like that. He's shown some athleticism, he's shown some moxie for the position, and he might be an interesting name. Now, I'll also say that he's not necessarily the only transfer name that I'm interested in. I think Chase Bryce from Clemson, if he were to indeed be aggressive and put his name out there, he's worth looking at too. And you can say what you want about the Boston College kid when he was healthy or the Texas Tech kid or whatever else. I haven't probably done as much work on them. So it's not only Newman for me that I'd be interested in, but there is something about Newman that keeps causing me to want to take that second and third look. Maybe Georgia fans feel the same way. One way or another, it certainly seems like there could be a path that Georgia's on here to find out sooner rather than later if it's going to add another quarterback into this competition, and that could set up a very fun conversation as the offseason rolls on. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Good to have you with us, no matter how you get to us. Live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as podcasts, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really glad, as I said, to have you with us, and really appreciate Kroger making it all possible. And by the way, Kroger's got you covered for Family Fun Night. You can enjoy the start of the new year with a cozy night in. And I know for my family, this sounds great, and I'm sure many of you would feel the same way. How about classic games like Sorry or Jenga? I've tried to tell my kids how much fun Jenga is. I got to try to keep pushing them on that. Classic children's books also 25% off, much the same way the games are 25% off. Select movies like The Lorax or Maleficent. It's the witch movie. Is it Maleficent? Is that how you say this? Maleficent? Maybe I'm saying that wrong. Either way, it's a good movie. Angelina Jolie's in it. You can get a free bag of Twizzlers or 3-count Pop Secret to enjoy while you watch the movies at home. Let me try this movie one more time. Is it Maleficent? Is that how you say it? It's the Jolie movie. You all like it. Anyway, big savings at Kroger. You can find that at the Kroger close to you. Hope you'll go ahead and check all of that out. We got Jeff Santel here coming up in just a moment. We'll talk to him. I'll get into this more of the Cade May stuff and like some of the, I think, ridiculous things that Attorney Tom Morris has said here coming up in just a few minutes, too. Let me do something else before we get there. Around the Doghouse, a movie that I do know how to pronounce the name of, and a movie I really enjoy, is the old basketball movie from the 80s called Hoosiers. And Gene Hackman plays the coach, Norman Dale. And there's one moment in particular in this movie that I've always really liked. You know, Dale's trying to, like, win over his new team and trying to sort of instill some discipline in them and get them to play the way that he wants them to play. And a guy fouls out of a game. There's only 4 players on the floor. You know the scene. I'm describing something you've probably seen a million times just like I have. And ref comes over and says, need one more. And Dale, the coach, played by Hackman, the actor, looks at them in their court and says, my team's on the floor. And it's like this great moment of like the kind of coaches you kind of always want to grow up with, you know, kind of in control of the moment, cool, calm. And that's exactly the way that, you know, Hackman kind of plays this role in the movie, saying that I only want to play the players who are kind of bought into what we want to do. My team is on the floor. And I think there's a certain element of Georgia moving towards the 2020 season where me, as a person that obviously wants the best for UGA, I want to say, hey, my team, in other words, the team that I'm cheering for, my team's on the field. Whoever's here, whoever wants to be a part of this, those are the guys that I want. And I think that's really important to kind of remember and rally around when you hear some of the things you're going to hear during this offseason. Now, for the most part, we don't really criticize other people for their hot takes too much because we give a bunch of hot takes. Some of them are right, some of them wrong. That's just kind of the fun part of the offseason. Everybody's kind of throwing what they want to up on against the wall, see if it sticks, and we all just kind of have a fun time with that. And some people keep score, some people don't, but it's just kind of the nature of the business. We've seen a guy from 24/7 Sports, for instance, pick Florida to go to the college football playoff in 2020. The vulnerability of Georgia opening the door for somebody else in the SEC East. Professional troll Danny Cannell was on Twitter recently this week saying you can book it that Florida's going to win the SEC East this season. And if you're a Georgia fan, I do think you're going to have to be prepared to endure a little bit of that this offseason. Now, for the most part, at least the Georgia fans that I come in contact with, whether it be in flesh and blood in real life, or whether it be the folks who interact with us here on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger, for the most part, people seem to be pretty good at knowing that this is all noise and it's all supposed to be blocked out. And much the same way coaches and players kind of do that kind of stuff, fans themselves do that. But there will probably be more of that this season, just given the fact that Georgia has a contested quarterback competition and you've got transfers leaving the program and whatever, you know, all kinds of questions being asked. It's going to open the door for just more hot takes about the demise, at least in terms of the 3-year dominance over the SEC East that Kirby Smart has had, the demise of that. However, but to go back and circle back to the whole Norman Dale Hoosiers thing, I think the Georgia fan can take some comfort in saying, my team's on the field. You may say that Florida's going to build itself up, or you may say that Tennessee, by virtue of the fact that it convinced Cade Mays to come back or whatever else, that shows that Georgia's not what it once was. But I think that you're going to start to see amongst a lot of Georgia fans a growing level of trust with the players this program does have. This the guys who are either on defense coming back for one final run or impressive young players who are looking to get their chance for a bigger spot on the stage. I think you're going to see a lot of confidence grow in Georgia fans, but the guys who are here. And they're unanswered questions, and we're not going to act like those things need to be glossed over. They need to be taken very seriously, especially when it comes to some of the shortcomings offensively. But let me give you one specific example defensively why it may not be quite as calamitous as some people have suggested that might be. I got a chance to talk after the Sugar Bowl to Monte Rice, and I told some of you at the time that my feeling on Rice was very much like what it felt like talking to J.R. Reed after last year's Super Bowl. That was a losing day for Georgia. This was a winning effort for the Dogs on January 1st this year against Baylor. But the same way of hearing Reed speak a year ago, me saying, man, that's a leader that Georgia needs more of in 2019. Hopefully he comes back. I felt the same way talking to Rice after this year's Sugar Bowl. He just has kind of just grown in this role of, man, this is a really cool customer. And this is a guy that just feels all grown up compared to the young man I remember trying to choose between Georgia and LSU and I guess Auburn, way back to the class of 2017. This is a young man that has just really, really grown up. And in terms of any would-be critics of the Dogs that are out there or any would-be doubters of the program that are out there, based on the conversation I had with Rice at the Sugar Bowl, here's what I believe that Monte would say to them.
I don't really listen to what people got to say because at the end of the day, they're not the one going out there practicing. They're not the one with 2 casts on their hand with with injuries, sprained wrist. It's not, they're not out there banging with us. They just talking. So, they can talk all they want.
So, listen, you're going to take the SEC East crown from Georgia, something that's owned for the last 3 years. You're going to take Georgia's spot kind of among the national elite away from it. You might be able to do it, but you're going to have to fight guys like Monte Rice to get that done. And, folks, that is not going to be an easy thing for anybody to do. And Rice's influence, and guys like Rice, their influence on this Georgia program is going to matter a lot in 2020. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is, as I said before, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll have more on the Cade Mays situation coming up in a moment. But for now, though, the latest on UGA recruiting, let's talk to Jeff Santel. And we will get Jeff Santel here coming up in just a moment. Good to have all of you with us here today as well. A lot of your comments coming up. Obviously, there's a lot of intrigue out there of how quickly Georgia might act on a transfer quarterback. I may get into this with Jeff here a bit in a moment. Is there a chance that Georgia might look, and I know this is going to come across as greedy, might look to add more than one? Is that a possibility? So we'll try to kind of get all of that here coming up in just a moment. Sounds like Jeff's ready to go. So we've got him. We're glad to have you with us as well. Let's do a little UGA recruiting talk.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, let me say hello to Jeff Santel here. And, Jeff, we appreciate you being a part of our program today. There is a lot of recruiting news that I want to get to here with you. I guess, obviously we typically turn to you when it comes to what's going on with the 2020 class or really any future high school recruits, but you also see Georgia, at least seemingly right now, kind of casting its net in the direction of some transfer quarterbacks there as well. And there's all kinds of names out there, whether it be what seems to be a strong possibility of a guy like Avery Newman, former Wake Forest quarterback, a possible deal with maybe assuming that he becomes a transfer quarterback like a guy like Chase Bryce or the Texas Tech kid, the Boston College kid, whatever else. I guess let me start open-ended and we'll kind of whittle our way down from there. What do you make of the pursuit? Seems to be kind of full-fledged here for Georgia when it comes to transfer quarterbacks.
Yeah. Hey, good morning, everybody. First of all, I guess it's like we put up in a DawgNation cover 4 item that's on the site right now is, basically I think of that Herb Russell line from Miracle, a great movie about the U.S. 1980 hockey team. From great opportunities come great moments. And, first of all, Brandon, I'd love to interact with you. If Avery Newman becomes a Bulldog, do you think that counts towards the 2020 class and that push for the number 1 overall class? That's certainly better than adding a 4-star cornerback, I might add, to the class.
Yeah, I don't really know, obviously, what the technicality on that would be, but in terms of how I would feel about the 2020 class, I'd feel pretty good about that. You and I have talked about this for years, Jeff. Whether it be Georgia who had one or one of Georgia's rivals who had one, I'm pretty consistent on this. I like players who've played before. And, when Florida goes out and gets a running back from Miami, even if it's not a guy who's had huge stats as of yet, That's still a guy who's a little bit older, a little bit more physically mature, a guy who's got some experience, and that matters. And for Georgia, who needs a quarterback, you better believe I'm going to feel that way even more. As much as you and I make a big deal, and certainly me with you makes a big deal about recruits and things of that nature, I think that transfers, because of their age, because of their experience, because of their physical maturity, I think they are incredibly valuable. And to the extent this sort of transfer portal thing continues to be the Wild West, the way it kind of has been the last couple of years, I think this time of year where the transfer portal is the most active and these teams who are the best at kind of working it to their benefit, I think that's a major college football story, and I think it's going to go a long way towards determining who plays the college football playoff, the national championship. I think transfers are a big part of the equation right now, as most of the quarterbacks in the college football playoff could attest.
So, yeah, Brandon, I think, on this portal business, there is a sense of, I think, bigger, faster, stronger, understands the speed of the game, coming there to a program for straight business, which is to pad the professional resume and then trampoline yourself to a national title shot. It's an overblown stat, but it's the truth right now. Of all those 4 quarterbacks that made the playoffs, 3 of them were portal players, and that's just part of the game now. And Brennan, I think with the graduate transfer and with quarterback, I think it kind of segues nicely into one of our resolutions here for DawgNation, and that's more chortles for Brandon in 2020.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a recruiting win. It could be something as, Georgia taking not 1, but maybe 2 graduate transfer quarterbacks this cycle. It's things like that where it's a little bit surprising to how Georgia can be what it was in 2019, and then maybe the reshaping of its offensive line with a little bit more mobile players, a potential dual-threat quarterback that can touch every part of the field with his deep ball and his out routes and his sideline routes. And you add that with shiny new weapons and toys coming in at wide receiver. And, Brandon, it might not just be new and exciting here for Georgia fans. It also might mean more high-powered and more turbocharged. And I know lots of people, Brandon, our viewers, your viewers, our audience, has clamored for, they want to have Georgia's quarterback to have that big, high-velocity arm, and they want to see a more mobile quarterback. And, man, could the 2020 graduate transfer portal cycle, could that check off all those boxes for the 2020 roster? I think that's very fascinating.
Yeah, and I think it is too. And something else you brought up is also really fascinating as well. And I admittedly wanted to ask you about this, the chance that Georgia could add an additional graduate transfer. And I know that comes across as greedy, which is very on brand for me, for the people who've watched and listened to our conversations for a long time. But you also know that that's essentially my solution to every problem in college football. Throw a bunch of bodies into a competition and kind of see how it all shakes out. Is there a chance that one of these guys, knowing their eligibility is precious, could be convinced to join another transfer quarterback in a competition where, admittedly, between, in this case, the 2 guys you would bring in going along with the current 3 guys you have on campus, at least one of those people is going to really get their feelings hurt? Is that too much to ask for Georgia to add not just 1 transfer quarterback, but a second transfer quarterback as well?
Yeah, so let's just take up, I think the Chase Bryce situation is a good way to start. I've known Chase Bryce. I remember him leading Grayson up and down the field with Mark Rick watching. Man, back in 2015, I think, before Georgia's indoor practice field was done and the House of Pain was done, and he always had Georgia ties and Georgia connections to his family. There was always a strong affinity for the Georgia program. If memory serves, I can see Chase Bryce wanting to be a coach one day, not just an NFL quarterback. He's currently a backup at Clemson behind a number 1 overall future NFL pick in Trevor Lawrence. Clemson is bringing in the next big thing, the number 1 overall quarterback in 2020, and DJ Uiagalelei. He's already on campus as an early enrollee. That seems to think there's a clear succession plan there to get DJ ready behind Trevor. The other thing, folks, and I love this hopeful news about Dwan Mathis. I love it. You want the best for that young man, but you also have to look at Georgia's depth chart quarterback room. We've written about Carson Beck. I feel he can certainly do the job, and he can handle it if it became his job. But Dwan Mathis' health, it's not certain he's going to be cleared and ready for spring practice. and it's also not certain what happens once he gets into some live contact as well. Georgia, from a roster management standpoint, needs to make sure it has a lot of available quarterbacks ready to play. And I think it's really just smart thinking to try and see what Georgia can do, and adding a lot of personnel to the 2020 quarterback room. Remember, Georgia was always chasing two incoming freshman quarterbacks in Carson Beck and C.J. Stroud late in the season in 2019 as well, because they just need more quarterbacks, and that was even with Jake Fromm coming back.
Yeah. Yeah, so since you opened the door on Chase Bryce, I'll walk through it here. We don't know yet that he's going to be a transfer quarterback, but it's largely speculated that he will be. And it sounds like, to listen to what you say there, that one of the things that Georgia could offer him if he were to join a guy like Newman, who, just because Newman's been playing, I would presume he'd be the point spread favorite to win that battle. But if Bryce came in addition to that, and you can correct my facts on this, I believe he has the extra year of eligibility still. And at Georgia, he could be, assuming that he were to beat out Beck and Mathis and Bennett, he could be the clear number 2 at Georgia, and maybe after that a starting quarterback, whereas at Clemson, given the presence of DJ Uiagalelei likely backing up Trevor Lawrence this year, that status at Clemson that he's enjoyed, he just may not have that in 2020. So even if Bryce were to transfer and not be a starter, is there a case to be made that Georgia could offer him something that Clemson couldn't?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we try to do there with that situation, without running through with the door with a battering ram, is just simply analyze whether a move like Georgia could be a good fit for Chase Bryce. And it, to me, seems like with what's happening at Clemson and then what's potentially happening at Georgia, it seems like that makes a lot of sense. And Brandon, I know you've already went down that road, at least in your inner Brandon Adams thought, but what would a quarterback room for Georgia look like? When everybody's out there and they're watching the quarterbacks warm up, if Georgia went from Jake Fromm, Stetson Bennett, Nathan Priestley, Dwan Mathis in 2019 to potentially a Jamie Newman, a Chase Bryce, a Carson Beck, a Dwan Mathis. Man, the quarterback position would appear to me talent on the hoof, arm velocity, type of bodies and athletes in the room. And that would seem like a little bit like night and day to me.
And, yeah, I don't want to talk about quarterbacks the entire time, but there is something else I do want to ask you about quarterbacks, because you've written about Carson Beck, and obviously Beck's a guy that made a lot of fans for himself during his high school career, high level of competition in the state of Florida, and some big numbers really throughout his career on that. I've seen some of Dwan Mathis in a Georgia uniform now, and even though he hasn't been, healthy to be a full contributor, he's kind of got at least, post-spring, he's kind of got a coolness about him. I like the way that he looks in a uniform. I like the way that he throws the ball. When I've seen him run, I like what he does there. Bennett's got his own fans there as well. I guess handicap the possibility that even if Georgia were to bring in, and we'll even say sky's the limit here for a moment, although I guess it's probably slightly more likely that Georgia brings in one transfer than two, but let's say there are transfer quarterbacks in the mix, handicap the possibility that the starting quarterback for the month of September at least ends up being one of the guys currently on campus, back as the early enrollee, Mathis moving into his second year in the program, or Stetson Bennett, who seemingly has been here forever, although I guess also just going into his second year of kind of full work here.
Yeah, first of all, I don't know if anybody can accurately calculate Dwan Mathis until they know he gets the clear bill of health. But
yeah.
The way I would apples to apples that is, to me, Carson Beck is an advanced high school prospect. The way he understands the game, and then you put his physical ability, his elite arm talent all the way around it. One of my favorite lines in that story, because I tried to get some scouting drip into that Carson Beck story and not just the personal side, was that Carson Beck can throw a 50-yard ball in a game 3 different ways. That's like the 50-yarder that you have to run under. That's the 50-yarder where you layer it over a layer of coverage with some safeties. And then there's the one that travels 50 yards and maybe it doesn't go more than 10 feet off the ground, and he just pipes that thing in there. That's really hard to do, that type of different ways for a long throw like that in a game. It's kind of like how Brandon can talk about 3 different ways he'd love to see a 5-star or a dual threat quarterback come into the Georgia program. But so I would think Beck, to me, seems more advanced. And I think, I'm just going to say, I think he can do the job if he had to do the job. I think he can give Georgia some of the similar results. Maybe just get there a different way than what Jake Fromm gave Georgia in 2017. But then you start adding these graduate transfers in the mix, and Brandon, those guys, frankly, are coming into play right away. And I would think if a talent like Jamie Newman, I think everybody's already seen the Pro Football Focus ratings about how well he threw into contested coverage and how well he threw into deep balls. And they even rated it, Pro Football Focus rated him the number 3 overall returning quarterback in college football behind Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields for the 2020 season. So there's a lot to like there about Newman, along with his legs. I think I'll add in one caveat that I didn't like the way his completion percentage dipped over his last 5 games of the year at Wake Forest. He had some good receivers at Wake Forest a year ago, and you saw in his last 4 or 5 ball games, he was only completing about 45 to 50% of his balls. That's something there to think about there with Jamie Newman as well. Chase Bryce is going to be schooled in the Clemson offense. He's practiced against probably the best defense in college football over the last 3 years that he's been at Clemson, year to year, and he's going to be game ready. He's going to have seen a lot of things. And remember that game that he saved a perfect season for Clemson when he came in and in relief of Trevor Lawrence. And that's a big boy element that, not even a Carson Beck or not even a Dwan Mathis or even a Stetson Bennett can say when they're looking at their quarterback futures as well. Chase Bryce has done it on a big stage with lots of stakes and lots of table stakes for a season on the table there for Clemson. So, again, as we talk about it, Brandon, I keep flashing back to that picture. If Georgia can put a lot of these names on the field in 2020, it's going to look like a demonstrably different quarterback room in the 2020 roster for Georgia, and that's going to open up a whole lot more possibilities for the offense in 2020.
You had some good reporting at DawgNation.com on Broderick Jones' immediate plans when it comes to his official visits. He's obviously a UGA commit. Dogs get one of those official visits. Still plans to go to Auburn, and I guess they still get to bat last on all of this to the extent that matters. But the new name here, and I thought this was kind of interesting, is the fact that he will go out to Fayetteville to see new coach Sam Pittman, a guy that he had a relationship dating back to his UGA commitment status with initially given to Pittman there at Arkansas. He'll take the official visit there. Does this change anything for Jones at all, the fact that he's going to Arkansas? Is this just a favor for a guy that he likes? Is this just a curiosity of seeing what it's like out at seemingly a long way away in Fayetteville? What do you make of the fact that Jones will alter his official visit plan a little bit and I guess go to Arkansas instead of going to Tennessee, if I've got that correct? What do you make of all of that?
Well, first of all, I guess it proves that not everybody related to the Georgia offensive line wants to go to Tennessee right now. The first thing I'll say is I'll say something that maybe Brandon would hope I would say is that Broderick Jones will take the visit to Arkansas and Sam Pittman will shoot a shot, but eventually he'll say, you need to go to Georgia. That's the best place for you. I think that's what Brandon, most of DawgNation and what you kind of think I hope happens here, or you would hope happens here. I think the reality is I'm just going to say that, number one, Pittman is a great recruiter, man. We've seen it firsthand. I think these are 2 vivid examples with Cade Mays and even Isaiah Wilson and some of those guys and Solomon Kinley, how big Pittman was for Georgia, how he was able to bring in guys that seemingly the odds were stacked way against it. Cade Mays from Tennessee, Xavier Truss from Rhode Island, Chad Lindbergh from Texas, Clay Webb from Alabama. So he's a great recruiter, but I do think he's going to shoot a shot. And the other thing in Pittman's arsenal is he's not going to be the offensive line coach there, which probably takes away a little bit of that pull because he's not going to be developing these guys every practice. But Brad Davis, who was at Missouri, who'd been at Florida for some time as well, he's a well-respected guy. That's why Sam Pittman tapped him to coach the offensive line. And he's filled, I think, with the Broderick Jones kind of moving pieces here, I think Georgia fans would feel a little more worried if a guy like Brad Davis was at Auburn and that was the new Auburn offensive line coach.
Okay.
But I think the huge thing I'm going to keep coming back to here with Broderick is it's simply location. I think Georgia has been such a cozy and comfortable fit for him. He's still planning to make his official visit with Cedric Granger the weekend of the 24th. And to me, getting Jones and Granger there on the same weekend with Coach Matt Luke, I think it's the best possible timing for both young men to get them both together to continue to cement those bonds that they had from playing alongside each other and practicing alongside each other at the Under Armour All-American game. I think that's what's really important along with the location And there's a yin and yang with all this, Brendan. And don't think that what won't be mentioned to Broderick Jones right away now is that, hey, Cade Mays making that decision to go home to Rocky Top. That's going to help Tennessee. Yeah. But it's also going to help Georgia in the pursuit of Broderick Jones, because now they can certainly dangle that, hey, the left tackle or the right tackle job is certainly open in Georgia now. I think Jamari Sawyer can be an ideal right tackle for Georgia in the future, maybe even a Warren McClendon or a Xavier Truss there as well. But that left tackle spot, they don't have that premium athlete that's going to be charged with shadowing and mirroring and getting in the way of guys like Nolan Smith and Azeez Ojulari on the other rosters coming off the edge. And I think that the playing time recipe or the playing time pot for Broderick Jones with the move here by Cade Mays certainly gets a lot sweeter for him to play and claim the starting job right away in Athens.
I'll try to squeeze in two more before we're done. You mentioned Cedric a moment ago. I want to ask you about him before we finish up. But one more thing on Broderick Jones here. I watched the video that y'all did with him at the Under Armour All-American game going back to the week of New Year's, and I couldn't really quite tell, other than, as you said, location and being close to home for his family, get a chance to be around him and watch him play. I couldn't really tell what mattered to him beyond that, because the way that he spoke about, Grimes or Porter at Auburn, the way that he spoke about Pittman, it was hard to really see much difference in that one way or another. He either doesn't have strong feelings or chooses to keep those close to his vest. I'm assuming that the fact that he could really step into Georgia pretty quickly in a tackle position, I'm guessing that would be really attractive to him. But once again, it's hard for me to know that one way for sure. Do you get a sense of how the degree to which any of this matters to Jones?
So, number one, I think the most important thing here will be location. Let me see if I can kind of rate them in my mind's eye of how it fits. Location, location, location. The second thing is I think the young man wants to place a little bit of subtlety or a little bit of drama around his recruitment. He just doesn't want to come out and say maybe what he's feeling. And I think this is, again, a case, Brandon, where the young man hadn't taken an official visit up to this point. The 3 he's going to take, he's not even going to take his 5. He's going to go to Arkansas, Georgia, and Auburn. The third thing is I think there's a relationship base that's built there with guys like Cedric Granger, Chad Lindbergh, and Darnell Washington. Jones and Washington were almost at the hip every time Connor Riley and I saw those guys practicing or hanging out after practice or on social media. Those guys were always tight together. And to me, when Broderick Jones said the fact that the number one class and coming in with a bunch of guys that can win championships, he said that mattered to him. He said that was important to him. And again, that's the lure of what Georgia can still have, even without Sam Pittman, is it would be 4/5 of that offensive line that he had built to command and conquer at Georgia when he was still the offensive line coach at Georgia. If these guys all split up, if Broderick Jones goes his own way, he can't be a part of something that it seemed to me like he felt was pretty special coming down the tracks in Athens.
All right, let me do one final thing before we let you go. I know you've got an article coming up at DawgNation.com taking a look at Cedric Granger. I won't ask you to give the whole store away, but it sounds like he's got some visits coming up. How does that, if at all, impact Georgia's continued pursuit of him, or I guess attempt to kind of hold on to him, given the fact that he does have some visits upcoming?
Yeah, I'd love to, maybe it's off interview talk to get your thoughts on it, Brandon. But, he's committed. He seems quite cozy with Georgia. My information leads me to believe he was a silent commitment to Georgia, maybe well in advance of when he actually went public with it last August. Cedric has not taken any official visits since the football season started way back in September. He's taken one to Oklahoma, and he's taken one to Texas A&M. Those are the only 2 official visits he's taken. He's got 3 left. I don't even know if he'll schedule all 5. Florida's got one of those right now. Alabama is a contender. But, it's one of those things where I understand how our audience is going to want constant updates about everything good, what's going on with Broderick, what's going on with Cedric Granger. He's a guy that I think can come in and play right away at Georgia at guard or at center. Maybe it might give some flexibility as quickly as he gets the position down, and maybe move Trey Hill around and maybe fill a hole in one of those other guard spots. I think with Granger, there's a lot of things, even more so than Broderick Jones, that lead me to believe that it would be highly unlikely for him to go anywhere else in Georgia.
So this is not a leading question. I'm honestly curious about this. I heard you mention a couple schools that he did take visits to. I heard you mention a couple schools that he might take visits to, but you didn't mention Georgia. Is it weird that he hasn't taken an official visit to Georgia, nor does he, at least based on my knowledge, have one planned yet?
Oh, yeah. Granger's going to Georgia, like I said earlier in
Okay.
the Broderick Jones discussion. It's the 24th.
Okay, I'm sorry. I misunderstood.
The only one, Brandon. Yeah, Brandon, that was the only one he even had said.
Perfect.
In late December. That's been planned for forever. He set the Georgia official visit first for the weekend of the 24th. He's been to Georgia. That was his first. Remember, he remembers that as his first big-time SEC offer. That was the first big-time college football game he went to on the first game of 2018 inside Sanford Stadium. He has a lot of family in the metro Atlanta area. He has more immediate family planning to move to the state of Georgia as well. There's just a lot of things besides just it being the best fit. I mean, Cedric Granger is one of the most mature recruiting young men I've ever been around in covering the Georgia beat or in covering high school football in general. When he made that answer, when he gave that answer, he said, matter-of-factly, Brandon, he said, if this was a football decision, I'd be going to Alabama or LSU. And then he started comparing the economy of Atlanta, Georgia, compared to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, compared to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or New Orleans, Louisiana. And he said there was no question the big dog or the alpha economy in terms of job growth, in terms of life after football, in terms of networking. He wants to be a graphic designer. He knew that his opportunities were much better playing in the state of Georgia and potentially making a living in the city of Atlanta compared to those two other alumni network bases for LSU and Alabama. That's a big boy answer. That's a smart, mature, young man answer. It's another one of the many reasons why Cedric Granger stands out as the future leader of the Georgia class to me.
Sounds like a pretty smart man to me as well, Jeff. Really good stuff. Love the piece on Broderick Jones up at DawgNation.com as we kind of further our information on what his process is going to be like. We'll look forward to reading a whole lot more from you. DawgNation.com, the forum as well at forum.DawgNation.com. And, of course, we'll enjoy getting a chance to speak to you back here again on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger very soon.
Yeah, guys, and one more shameless plug for, don't shoot me on this, Brandon, the freshman who I feel is the most talented and athletic freshman on the Georgia campus. That's Matthew Bowling. Freshman Matthew Bowling has his first indoor track meet with the Georgia Bulldogs at men's and women's meet on Saturday in Athens. And that's the first time Matthew Bowling is going to suit up, going to do the long jump. He's going to run the 60 for the Georgia Bulldogs. That in itself is something we wanted to make sure we mentioned on the program.
That's a good tip, Jeff. I appreciate you sharing that. We'll look forward to talking to you soon. Hope you have a good weekend.
All right, guys. Take it easy.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I'm actually glad that Jeff mentioned that. You know, one of the things we do every Friday on the show, we do our Kroger Kickoff, and it's our kind of preview of the weekend. And admittedly, what do you call them, like stick and ball sports? I'm a little bit more like just well-versed on some of them from time to time. We usually give the Gym Dogs a shout-out there as well. But when it comes to some of the other stuff, you know, tennis, the track and field program at Georgia, even though they've had great success, swimming and diving, we're not always super, I guess, educated in what's going on with some of them. But now that Bowling's here and doing his thing, I'm guessing we're going to have to do a little bit more of that. So we'll try to do our best to kind of keep fully up to date on everything going on with UGA athletics as we kind of head into that fun time of year. I like the gym season when you're doing some indoor sports and doing some things like that. I like basketball. Georgia's got a big one coming up on Saturday. I just kind of like all of that, and so we'll cover that coming up in just a little bit. Before we go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, let me also mention this. Interesting that Jeff a moment ago started his conversation by mentioning Herb Brooks, the former coach of the 1980 U.S. men's hockey team. Back then, it's all the only hockey team America had, I guess. So a couple of 80s references today, me a more fictionalized version from Normandale and Hoosiers. Jeff, the very real Herb Brooks, who led the hockey team to the Miracle in Lake Placid there. So very 80s themed show for us here today on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. So what do you want from us on that? As we go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, let me remind you it's a great time to celebrate a very, very bold vacation as the new year starts. And really one of the things that makes Royal Caribbean fun are the entertainment options you have on the ship, setting the standard really with dazzling full-scale productions, Broadway, Tony Award-winning musicals, ice skating shows, dive shows. The Oasis-class ships have the aqua theater shows, all kinds of night spots, sports bars, karaoke bars, just really fun, lots of live music. It's just an amazing entertainment, entire array of options on a Royal Caribbean cruise. So you need a vacation, get one. Reach out to your own travel advisor, or do me a favor and contact our friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority. You can call them at 800-326-4971. That's 800-326-4971. Let them know you heard about them right here with us on DawgNation Daily. So I've told you before, I love coaching rumors. We had the culmination of a wild series of rumors yesterday when former Washington State coach Mike Leach was brought to Starkville and introduced as the new coach of the Bulldogs. In fact, I think we have a little bit of the imagery from his arrival there. For those of you watching on video, you see him get off the plane, quite awkwardly shaking a cowbell for those of you watching on video. This has been a fun rumor to watch, and anytime Leach's name gets brought into this, it's going to be even more fun for a lot of the members of the media. I want to be totally clear about this, and I'm not trying to be a wet blanket for the people who kind of want, Leach and want the circus sideshow that he brings with him. This is going to be an unmitigated disaster, a total failure, and Mississippi State will be left looking like a joke when it's all said and done. I saw where Stephen Godfrey from SB Nation said that one of the ways in which Mississippi State had kind of arrived on Leach is they had some technology that enabled them to measure the intensity of various names on social media, and Leach had high positives with many people, and that's one of the reasons why they went in that direction. This is another classic example of Twitter getting it wrong again. Because the thing that you see with Leach when he goes viral with a lot of his comments or all the crazy stuff that he says about zombies or whatever else, but the stuff that doesn't go quite as viral is when he shrugs his shoulders in Wazoo in Pullman and says, "What do you want from me? I can't beat my in-state rival, the Washington Huskies, because they recruit better than me." Try that one time in the SEC and see how that goes. Let's not forget that Tennessee's old athletic director got fired for essentially having the temerity to reach in Leach's direction. I think that's the appropriate look at a guy who once sued his former employer. I think this is a joke of a hire, and I think it will leave Mississippi State eventually more embarrassed than it would have been if it just bit the bullet and hired Hugh Freeze now, someone we know is going to be a pretty good coach. I'll also say this, and I'll say it kind of quickly because I'm going long here. I think with Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, who I believe is a good offensive mind, although very much unproven as a head coach, Leach now at Mississippi State, who I'm going to be on record as saying will be a disaster, I think the door is open just a little bit more for Sam Pittman to have more success at Arkansas than I initially would have thought was possible. Because Pittman, even though he's a pretty big personality himself, is for the most part having a by-the-books, nuts-and-bolts approach to beginning his Arkansas career. He's hiring good assistants. He's trying to do sensible work on the recruiting trail, even though he's got no experience, and I, for one, probably thought he'd never be a head coach. He actually looks a little bit more like a competent coach than Mike Leach, who I think will eventually shame Mississippi State, and Ole Miss, who's already shamed a number of former employers. I think the things going on in the Magnolia State, I think that actually opens the door for Pittman to eventually enjoy a little bit more success. A couple other stories real quick here to give you an idea of why a guy like Leach works in Pullman, Washington, or Lubbock, Texas, and not necessarily in more of a pressure cooker of the SEC. Just look at Bruce Feldman, who recently kind of put out a potential name to replace Leach at Washington State might be Jim McElwain. Now, McElwain, because of all the stuff that went on in Gainesville and some of the stuff accidentally that got attached to his name, including the shark photo, which was not McElwain, but McElwain kind of had a poor response to when it was brought up to him. McElwain would essentially be unhireable almost anywhere else. He's just got a lot of baggage next to his name. But in a place like Pullman, Washington, which is way out in the middle of nowhere, yeah, why not? It probably works. So a place that could hire Jim McElwain can also tolerate Mike Leach. But what Starkville, Mississippi is about to find out is tolerating Leach in a more intense media environment, even in Starkville, that's going to be true compared to Pullman. It's not going to be quite as successful as I think they might think. Couple other things here. Tennessee did officially announce Cade Mays on its roster yesterday with a tweet and a picture there. So Mays is in the fold there in Knoxville. I'll have more on the Tom Mars thing in just a moment, but it did become official with Mays there in Knoxville yesterday. And then one final thing as a part of our cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Am I wrong for saying this? And maybe y'all feel differently than I do. It seems like watching on TV and reading online, where the secondary ticket market is ablaze right now, there is incredible buzz for the national championship game if you're close to the LSU program, or if you're close to the Clemson program, or if you're close to Louisiana where it's being played. These are two great teams. I would have dreamed about watching them play really at any point in this year. But am I wrong for saying it doesn't feel like in our state, wherever I happen to live in Georgia, obviously, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of buzz for this national championship game right now. I'm always just really, really not a fan of these long layoffs for the game. And I think that's going to seems to be hurting the national championship game right now. Maybe I'm wrong about that because the get-in price in the Superdome is like $900. So clearly folks there are into the game. I just can't quite tell right now how much we're into the game. Game is Monday. We'll obviously talk about it then and make that cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. All right, let me say this just for a moment. And, obviously the Mays thing has been ridiculous. The fact that he's going to try to get immediate eligibility is ridiculous. I said this yesterday. The fact that his dad had part of his finger severed at Georgia seems to me, even though the details of that are like the wildest of all this, that to me seems to be the most cut and dry part of this whatsoever. The part of the Mays thing that's always aggravated me is, since the last couple of days since we've learned this, is the fact that they're going to try to make some sort of case for why Mays, who was a starter in good standing at Georgia at the end of the season, should have a hardship to be immediately eligible in Knoxville. And the guy at the center of all of this is attorney Tom Mars, who was also a big figure in the Justin Fields mess there as well. Drew Butler, former Georgia punter, had kind of sort of chided Mars online on Twitter about the fact that Mars had said that Georgia had intentionally leaked the details of the Mr. Mays lawsuit about the finger. And Tom Mars' response to Georgia saying they did not do that was totally childish and immature, a dog emoji, and I guess what is supposed to be a Pinocchio lying emoji, essentially saying in two emojis that Georgia's lying about this. This coming from Dan Wolken on Twitter, who's also kind of a professional troll, at least when it comes to a UGA. Tom Mars texting that to him, apparently, according to Dan Wolken. So let me just say this about Tom Mars, because I know he's not a very popular figure with many Georgia fans. Attorneys like this will always be very popular with sports writers for three reasons. Reason number one is they are sources who are easily accessible. Reason number two is they kind of have the whiff of authority. Guy who works for the NCAA, guy who represents Cade Mays, just sort of feels like they have a little bit of authority. And they're also really willing to say outrageous, salacious things. That's a triple crown that makes these guys invaluable to people like Dan Wolken, who writes for USA Today. But for the average sports fan, I think they see right through this. And I think when they look at a guy like Mars and say, I want less of that in college football. I know that I do. And listen, I'm not going to say a bad word about Cade Mays and whatever. I used to be pretty open to the idea of transfer market and being a little bit more lenient with that. And when the whole notion of the transfer portal first came around, I guess I was kind of like, yeah, bring it on, let these guys go be where they want to be. But when it opens the door for a guy like Tom Mars to have a bigger platform in college football, then I think there's no way that's a good thing. And so whatever has to be done to change the rules so I hear less about attorneys like him in instances like this, I'm all for whatever change has to be made for that. Let me do the Kroger kickoff on the way out the door here. Obviously, Kroger is a great way to get ready for the weekend no matter what you have going on. Kroger can help you do that here this weekend. Also, some big things going on with UGA athletics as well. Let me show you some of that. As Jeff mentioned, Matthew Bowling making his UGA track and field debut. We've also got the Gym Dogs getting going tonight against LSU. That is at Stegman Coliseum. Georgia basketball on the road tomorrow at Auburn. Lady Dogs at Tennessee. Tough game for them in Knoxville on Sunday. And then you've got 8 former UGA golfers on the PGA Tour this weekend. Sony Open there in Honolulu. You get some primetime golf there for that, so worth checking out. Brendan Todd, some of those former UGA golfers giving it a go there in Hawaii this weekend. Boy, if there's one thing you want to learn about all of this, you've got young kids and they have aspirations towards athletics, put a golf club in their hand. Because watch some NFL playoffs this weekend. They're expecting so much snow in Green Bay. They have asked for volunteers in the state of Wisconsin to come over and help shovel the snow out of Lambeau Field. That's what a professional football player deals with this weekend. Professional golfers enjoy the sun and the warmth of Hawaii. You don't have to tell me which one I'd rather be a part of. So put a golf club in your kids' hands if they have athletic aspirations. If you've got aspirations of reminding that Florida fan in your life, though, what the real story is about how things are stacking up in the SEC East, remind them with our Gatorator Updater that it's been 1,168 days since the lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. Have a good weekend, everybody. We'll see you Monday. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. air, heating, plumbing, electric. R.S. Andrews can do all of those things for us. They'll do all those things for you. And by the way, our buddy Dari from R.S. Andrews is going to be with us on Monday. We've done go with the flow with him all throughout the season, making picks against games. One final game to pick on Monday will be the national championship. So we'll have Dari here during our cool down on Monday to make that pick, and a lot of you can kind of weigh in on your national championship thoughts as well. And I guess I know most of you want to talk Georgia football, and that's what we will do here for about 10 minutes or so. But I know, beyond that, I would actually like to find out from you, am I the only one who thinks that if you're away from Louisiana right now where the game is really hot, it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of just buzz about this national championship game, even though LSU-Clemson's a great game on paper? I think the long layoff here is kind of hurting the sport a bit. You can kind of weigh in on that. And as I said before, we'll do about 10 good minutes, and then after that we've got a very busy day around Dog Nation. So let us do that. We'll be off and running. Starting on YouTube, let me mute things up here. RT367 gives us an and on video. Yes, that one continues to live on. What else is going on? Brandon Williams and the subject of Kendall Milton. Yeah, Milton's one of those guys I can't wait to see. I think we say this every year, and it, for the most part, always kind of turns out to be true. The lead up to spring practice, and the great news is it'll be here before you know it. Just blink your eyes 5 times, and spring practice is going to be here. And we'll be right back in the mix of getting ready for another season, which I'm always really excited about. And I think that Milton's presence is one of those things that's going to make spring practice really fun. I do. I think that's going to be great. Spencer Edwards says, your thoughts on Newman? Yeah, so I'll kind of reset where we started the show here today. I think that you got to be careful not to take a guy whose resume certainly isn't perfect, as Jeff said, down the stretch, had some issues. His numbers kind of waned. Some of that was maybe better competition. Some of that, as I've been told, may have been some receivers who got a little banged up. Some of that was maybe he had gotten a little banged up. I'm sure there's plenty of reasons to explain away whatever you want to. But it's kind of a mixed bag for him, statistically speaking. But the athletic profile really checks out. Pretty good arm, certainly a runner, a good athlete, a guy that a draft person in the media has said might have been an interesting draft pick had he come out this season. So I like him. Going to hold off any kind of proclamation about how good I think he's going to be, because in a Georgia uniform, I have no idea how good he would be. But I do think that when you take a guy like that, you put him around better talent, or put better talent around him, better offensive line, even though Georgia's receivers have been maligned, better than Wake Forest, certainly for sure. Really good running game to take some of the pressure off him there in that regard. And just imagine the read option with a guy like that, giving the ball to a guy like Zamir White or Kendall Milton or whomever else you want to mention here. I think the chance for success, Spencer, is absolutely there for a guy like Newman at Georgia. And of all the transfer quarterbacks I've been made aware of, just given the likelihood they could land at UGA, Newman's been kind of my favorite. I am also interested in Chase Bryce a bit here too, and in the right circumstances could be interested in a guy like Costello from Stanford as well. And the BC guy, the Texas Tech guy, people like that, I probably just haven't done enough research on them one way or another. But when it comes to Newman, I see a lot to like. I do. And if he announces at some point in time that he's coming to Georgia, I'll treat it as really good news. Jalen Jackson says Georgia will probably adopt some form of the Wake Forest offense if Newman comes. Yeah, Dave Clawson, former coach, I believe at Richmond, I believe that's kind of where he cut his teeth. For a long time, the Spiders in that kind of 1AA, which was kind of known back then, FCS now, they were kind of that, I guess, laboratory almost for innovative offensive ideas. And so, I did watch a little bit of Wake this year, didn't really, I guess, pay much attention to any individual player on the field necessarily, but at times that's a pretty good team. A better team than maybe some people probably realized. Struggled a little bit down the stretch, I guess, but certainly, not able to slow down Clemson at all, for instance. But maybe a better team than some people realize. GB2 says, has any team ever in the history of college football not allowed a rushing touchdown to a running back or a fullback? I'm guessing you probably have to go back a really long time, because Georgia's streak of how long it went, I think it was to the Auburn game without allowing a rushing touchdown, that in itself was like a 20, 30 years something or another. It had been decades since any team had gone that deep into a season. And honestly, at a certain point, you get to a portion of time where stats for like really, really intricate details of a game like that just weren't quite as kept as accurately. So we'll be left to guess on some of that, because the farther back you go, the less reliable the data becomes. But Georgia certainly put itself in kind of a rare position to go an entire season and not give up a touchdown to a running back. That's a pretty wild thing. A couple other YouTubes, and we'll go to Facebook. Carl Temple says, fun fact, Wayne Knight, the actor who played Newman on Seinfeld, also went to UGA. True story. So I'll tell you a quick thing here, and I said this to some of the guys around here before the show started. One of the things that I'm not always great at is I'm not great with names. I never have been. And I say that because I don't want anybody to say it's because I'm getting older, because I think I was this way when I was younger too. Small details have always escaped me. And so sometimes when it comes to Jamie Newman, I keep wanting to call him Jamie Duncan. And Jamie Duncan was like a linebacker at Wake Forest. At Vanderbilt. A linebacker at Vanderbilt. He's not a famous player. He's just a player. And for some reason, I kept wanting to call Newman by the wrong name, or really more than anything, because Newman wasn't really famous to me before this week, I kept forgetting what his name was. And so somebody before the show began actually said the same thing. Just thinking about Newman from Seinfeld, Wayne Knight went to George, and that, I believe that's called a mnemonic device, I believe. That mnemonic device has helped me remember throughout the show that it's Jamie Newman and not Jamie Duncan or Jamie whomever. So that has definitely helped. Magoo82, thanks for the kind words on that. Now, I did not know this. Is this true? I did know that Wayne Knight went to Georgia, but Hampton Scott says that Wayne Knight was Harry Dog, the mascot. He put the costume on for UGA games. Did you know that? I did not know that was true. If that is true, that's a very interesting piece of information. I was not aware of that. CB says 3 of the 4 semifinal teams had transfer quarterbacks. That is definitely true. So the sky could potentially be the limit. Dennis Wilson, who typically says bad things about me, does remind me that I'm only 42, which is exactly right. That's why I'm way too young to be forgetting about names and things like that. We did joke the other day about my seemingly, whether it be because of the lighting, we have a lot of lights in here too, by the way, or whatever else, the fact the hairs get a little grayer these days. I think one day, much like a wrestling heel, I think I'm just going to come in here, spray tan, completely like jet black hair, and just like act like nothing is different and just dare anyone to call me out on it. I think I may do that eventually. Over on Facebook for a couple of moments, and then we got like 5 minutes left, and I got to go. A couple Facebook comments. What else is? Steve Bond says maybe we should just bring in walk-on freshman quarterbacks and target a star graduate transfer every year. I mean, in a weird way, just given how prevalent graduate transfers are, I'd be kind of okay being in that mix. I mean, if LSU really does get Derek King, which is total speculation, but a possibility, that's kind of the road they're on, right? Burrow is a transfer. King would be a transfer. The guy after him might very well be a transfer. You know, one of the things that Orgeron has continued, going back to the Les Miles era, is they really haven't recruited the quarterback position all that well. They've missed out on some guys they thought they were going to get. Come to find out, at least in one of those cases, Felipe Franks, having gotten him, might not have been that great of a win. But, you know, that's just been a little bit of an issue. There aren't a lot of really good quarterbacks to go around. But if you've got everything else in place but a quarterback, suddenly a graduate transfer views you as a pretty strong option, especially if you've got a really built-out coaching staff the way that LSU does with Joe Brady. So, yeah, maybe that's that. Kimberly Cox says she's driving and just saw Auburn logo huge on a car. Kimberly, I know that can be a shocking thing to see. Just make sure you keep your hands at 10 and 2 and don't drive off the road. By the way, also try to keep it on the DL that you're commenting while driving as well, I guess, because I think it's my official duty to say we appreciate you being a part of the show, but just be careful out there. Just be careful. Matt Rugavina says he started going gray his freshman year at Georgia. Keeping the hair shorter is a good way to kind of diminish that. And I think that's true. I mean, it's like, y'all remember the old Tech basketball coach, Bobby Crimmins? When he was coaching there, he was actually fairly young. But, man, his hair was as gray as could be, like all of it. And, like, so, I mean, if you see him now, he essentially looks the way now that he did then. But very, very gray hair. Very, very gray hair. Way back then at a pretty early age. Neil Adams says, have you watched Newman's film yourself? He was a 3-star in high school. He's in talks to be the first or second rounder now. Yeah, so what I've seen from Newman are highlights. And I think it's important to note that when people say they've seen his film, for the most part, what they're watching are a collection of highlights. And Newman's going to be one of those guys, the really good moments look really, really strong. The other moments, maybe not so much so. So if he comes to Georgia, I'm not quite sure what Georgia's getting, but I think the possibility that's really good is certainly a strong one. Funny line from Kimberly Cox. We appreciate her checking in. She's a funny gal. All right, a couple more Facebook comments, and then we have got to go. Joel Moody says, will Pickens break the single season for yards in the season? I think that Pickens got a chance to break a lot of records at Georgia if he continues to play the way that he did in the Sugar Bowl. Vernon Luzier says, go ahead, BA. We'll definitely call you out on the hair dye. I'm sure y'all will. I'm sure you will. You wouldn't miss a thing. Would not miss a thing. A couple other Facebooks, and we got to go. This is a good question. Reginald Johnson says, odds, will UGA see 2,000-yard rushers or 2,000-yard receivers in 2020? So it is important to note. And, I am quite optimistic about what Georgia has a chance to do in 2020. Quite optimistic. But this offseason will be a little bit different in that you don't have quite as many obvious givens on really any of those position groups as you might have had in previous years. DeAndre Swift is gone. Kendall Milton's a really good-looking freshman coming in. The guys that are on campus and have been here and providing that depth, you haven't really seen a lot from them. Zamir White gave you a good look at the Sugar Bowl, but, to feel more confident about saying, yeah, he's going to really break out and be that 1,000-yard rusher this year, to have more confidence in making that prediction, I would have liked to have seen more from him during the season. And when it comes to the receivers, obviously, given what both Blaylock and Pickens did in their freshman season, it'd be easy to say, and now statistically they take the next step with their development, and there's a very good chance they'll do that. But they both have very different questions facing them. Pickens, one way or another, does have to address the fact that in 2 of Georgia's final 3 games, he had to miss a half, and that's one of those things that he's going to have to work on during this offseason. Blaylock's dealing with his injury recovery. It's a different kind of concern, but until he's back fully, completely healthy again, you'll at least have a little bit of concern about that. So in terms of the opportunity for lots of breakout performers for Georgia offensively, they certainly have those. But in terms of sure, true givens, at least on paper, it seems like Georgia's got a few less of those this year than it might would have had in previous years. But we'll obviously have a long time to talk about that in the days to come. For now, here on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger, we've got to get ready to wrap up and let you all get started with your weekend. And, of course, don't forget Kroger, a great way to get wrapped up and started with the weekend, whether it be pro football parties over the course of the weekend or snacks for your youth league team playing its game. Whatever you're doing this weekend, Kroger's a great choice for all of you on that. And, of course, make sure you check out the AJC for Atlanta News Now, a great way to go up to date on everything happening in your world. Always a big weekend preview in there, always big things happening in our world. The AJC certainly providing really in-depth analysis of all of that, so you're going to want to make sure you check them out there as well. AJC.com for Atlanta News Now. By the way, I'll see you at 1 p.m. this afternoon for AJC Falcons News Now, presented by Miller Lite on our video channels there too. So that'll be a fun thing to talk some pro football later on this afternoon. For now, though, thanks for being here. RS Andrews Cool Down. Check them out online at rsandrews.com. Get that $99 Mega Furnace Safety Check. Make sure your heating system is ready to go for the rest of the winter. And, of course, back here again on Monday. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. Y'all have a great weekend. I look forward to speaking to you then. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.